Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is John McKay. He's a retired Marine Corps colonel who amassed a unique body of knowledge that allowed him to make crucial contributions in U.S. foreign policy. We're lucky to have Colonel McKay for his third visit. And the best way to get a primer on him is to listen to his previous episodes, so do yourself that favor. Colonel McKay sat down with Pete and they talked about Tim McIntosh's book, The Arabs, which itself is voluminous and fascinating, and what it tells us about the Arab people, or more importantly, what it reveals about our failure to fully understand cultural history and the nuances that drive some of their attitudes and decisions, while we set expectations and make policies that impact that region. Impacting our own region, we are promoting our favorite cause, Save the Brave, and you can read about them at savethebrave.org. And that event coming up is the Simon R. Litke Memorial Golf Tournament at the Temecula Creek Golf Course on October 4th. Now, Save the Brave is a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans cope with post-traumatic stress. You can register for the tournament at savethebrave.org/event, and that link will be on our website as well. We also urge you to help us by rating and reviewing the Break It Down show, especially if you like us. You can go to iTunes or Google Play or Spotify or wherever you listen to find podcasts like ours and give us that 5-star rating and review. And back with us for a third time, and we hope the third of a long series of visits, of course. He's now an adjunct professor of history at California State University, Sacramento. Go Hornets. A friend of the show and someone whose insight and experience we'll never get enough of around here. Our guest today, Colonel John McKay.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is John McKay, and once again, we're on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
I think the first thing you, as the commander, both in person and in symbol, have to be able to do is to instill a sense of commonality within all these disparate groups, the sense of commonality of mission, and maybe not to the extent that you have mutual support, but you have mutual understanding, and you're able to, based on that commonality of mission, you're able to allow them the independence to execute that mission as their particular environment dictates. And of course, that takes some savoir-faire on the part of the local unit commander, that he's able to read the tea leaves properly. And that would be another part of my leadership role, would be able to have confidence in all of these disparate group leaders, and yet be able to instill that commonality of purpose and the idea that they are responsible for producing what they've been sent out to produce, find out, whatever, and you rely on them for that specific thing, but you rely on the whole to put together something that is much larger than these disparate groups are separately. If you can instill that sense of commonality, would be one of the things I would strive for. The other thing that would be, I know I put too much emphasis on personality, and the military tries to, particularly at lower ranks, your company grade officers, we're all in this together. Personality doesn't matter. You got to be professional. Well, personality does matter. And if you're a commander and you don't have competence, let's say you have 11 groups out there. If you have competence in 9 of them, that's fine. What do you do with the others? And then you come up with the challenge, and it is a challenge. Do you groom and curry and stroke these 2, or do you get rid of them and try to orient the mission to what it's supposed to be? It's a challenge. The only thing I can compare it to, and unfortunately I never talked to him about it that much, was when my father commanded the 301st CB Battalion in the Pacific. And it's not even a footnote of history. That was the only dredging battalion in the Pacific. It was a Navy CB battalion. And he had dredges at Naha in Okinawa. They actually moved the dredges into Naha while they were still fighting the Japanese. He had a dredge at Saipan. He had a dredge at Tinian. They had to do planning for if they were going to land in Japan, anticipating the Japanese would mine or destroy the harbors. And I can't remember. It was Tinian, Saipan, Eniwetok, and Guam. Kept their dredges in Guam from the fall of Guam in 1943. But, not only are these disparate groups, but there's considerable costly equipment involved in all of this. And how do you pull that together? I don't have the answer, and unfortunately, I never talked to my father about it. But it would be a challenge. But I have never, unfortunately, I would say, been faced with that challenge.
Yeah, and I'd never considered that challenge, because I'm a boots on the ground guy. I'm 84, and sure, we're age peers, me and the captain who's above me, because I'm 25 years old or whatever, 26 at the time. But an E4 doesn't talk to a captain, certainly doesn't talk to the colonel, especially when I'm, 50 miles away from him. And I thought about all the different places we could be, whether we were embedded with the Russians or the Swedes or the Poles. And then what they don't want is someone else's commander, even if it's a captain, especially a captain. Like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, well, these are my guys. I'm going to come check them out. Yeah, well, not on the Polish camp, you're not, or whatever, right? Because they could say that. The Polish commander would be like, any commander, get off my camp.
Yeah, well, that's right.
And then you leave. And so, yeah. And then how much you're looking at the Intel products coming in and someone saying, hey, Team 5 just isn't getting it. Maybe then you go deal with it. Maybe Team 7's attached commander is raging at them and you getting a lot of guff coming down. But yeah, I bet you just spend a lot of your time dealing with the problems and then dealing with the home organization.
Hey, this is Pete. Real quick, I just want to let you guys know we are proud to announce our official support of Save the Brave, a certified nonprofit 501c3 with a charter of helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. Here's how you can help. Go to savethebrave.com, click on the link on the website, and my recommendation is this. Subscribe. Give them $20 a month. You've got subscriptions that you can turn off right now that you're not using that are $20 a month. Swap that out. Get involved. Let's help these folks out.
I bet you just spend a lot of your time dealing with the problems and then dealing with the home organization, because the captain can't just go run around to 17 different locations. He'd be gone all the time.
And we go back to what we've discussed, particularly the last session, this business of being able to culturate yourself to whether you're with the Ukrainians, the Poles, the Russians, the Swedes. That in itself, talk about disparate groups.
Yeah.
Not in any derogatory fashion, but these people come from different cultures. They do, we got a common mission. Yeah, but we don't do it that way.
Right. Yeah.
And you got to put yourself into that process and have to do it well to be effective.
Yeah, there's so many you think about the variables in general. And granted, this is Bosnia. It turned out to not be this really high impact kinetic fight. But we didn't know that going in. And so you have to deal with not only your own immediate team leader's capacity to do the job, which is really unknown because we weren't a unit that did this job. We really had no train up. We watched a video on how to drive in the winter 15 times. It's like
whatever.
Yeah. And maybe did some role plays, but you were in no way really prepared. You just so if you as the leader are cowed by the Swedish battalion commander, it's like, you're not going out in my battle space. You can work on this camp. You can burn this poo. Right. And you're like, but we don't burn poo. It's on that leader to figure out how to work with the local environment and either work within it or get out of it. And it's all of these things inhibit the battalion, brigade, division, all these different level commanders. Like you have a whole dead spot here in your tactical capacity.
And then I'm not putting you on the spot, but what about and again, it was reported in the press But I happened to have a colleague who was British that was with the Ukrainian battalion doing some interesting things, but became aware early on that they were running prostitution. So what do you do there?
Yeah.
Hey, coach, this is going on. Does that inhibit your mission? Do you become a tattletale, persona non grata?
Yeah.
Nobody talks to you, and yet there's, criminal activity going on.
Yeah. There was a beautiful Bosniak young lady that worked in our camp. And, we had screened her and talked to her, and, she's no threat to us. We don't care. And then it turned out that she was, a prostitute. And we had a long conversation within our team, because you can't let that get out until we decide how we want to approach it. And ultimately, we were like, this is a local command issue, not our issue. It has nothing to do with, she's not a spy. She's not,
operationally working for you.
Yeah. And we had no indication that she was trying to, like, a honeypot.
Yeah.
Because that was our main concern is there someone trying to collect on us? And of course there is somewhere, but how dangerous is it? Does that require your attention, or should we be out forward collecting? It was a long, heated conversation on the team as we tried to sort through what we do, because some of us in our field are very law enforcement driven. True. I'm not. I would rather be out collecting, trying to find out about them, and have them worry about us projecting out than their attention anywhere near the camp. Not to ignore that, but I'd rather be their problem than be our problem.
How did you resolve it?
Well, I was an E4, so I only had a say. But ultimately, we sort of just let the local commander, who's a colonel, he knows how to handle all that stuff. We let them handle it, and then just said, if there's anything that's intel related, let us know. Right. And then we didn't even report it up through our chain, because that just opens it.
Absolutely.
That could come back and hurt our boss. But so we're just not even going to say that. And I don't recall specifically, but I'm almost 100% sure we told him, we're not going to report this on our side. We'll let you guys handle it. It's that delicate, and that has nothing to do with operational tempo.
Not. But it can sure screw up the works.
Yeah.
As you say.
Yeah.
The word gets out and the wrong person gets a hold of it.
Yeah. And it's the 5th incident, and the commander's like, why is this happening? And all of a sudden that colonel who was in line for a star is now sweating his star, and that's bad for everybody.
Or maybe he's sweating his position.
Yeah, for sure.
Relieved for cause.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No trust and confidence in your ability to carry out your mission.
Yeah, because some E4 is having sex and you're in 06.
With one of the women you were with. Some of your people have hired. I mean.
Yeah. Just interesting to talk to someone from your past and get a sense for what their job was. And it's one of the fun things about doing these, but I call them spy versus spy shows, where we talk shop about all the complexities of being a collector, whether it's someone who's tactical collecting like you guys would do on the ground, or someone who's more sophisticated machine like me, or someone who later on, his name's Eric, later on the commander that I had, he worked like for a sub team of a subsection over in the cellar of a backdoor team, but they were really good at what they did. And so they actually had their finger on the pulse of Al-Qaeda before 9/11. And they're like, there's a problem coming. And here are the areas where these sleepers, and they used, like an AI type system to identify these things. And they're like, this is a real thing. But the problem is they're a sub team back in the corner. They didn't have the influence to really raise any kind of credible alarm. Even if, the more you swing your arms, the more they're like, you're crazy.
Right.
So I don't know. It's just the whole intel world is so complex,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think history is replete with examples of not picking the right piece of intel and suffering dire consequences as a result.
Let's use that as our segue, because I want to talk about that book over there. And hopefully we get the author on the show sometime next month, but it's called Arabs. And
you have to, I think the full title, although wordy, is worth noting, because it does tell you what the book's about. And it is Arabs, a 3,000-year history of peoples, tribes, and empires.
So that is not in any way important before we go take on a Middle Eastern fight.
I've mentioned to you before you came up, this book came out this year.
Yeah.
I would love to meet the author. I taught a course last semester at California State University, Sacramento. It was the first time the course had ever been taught I put it together and I taught it by myself. I did speak to some of the Muslim faculty members. They were in political science, they were in history, and my course was titled Geography of the Middle East and Levant. And I did teach geography, but I taught with more emphasis of the interaction between geographical locations and the humanity that occupies or doesn't occupy that space. And I remarked to you, I sure wished I'd read this book before I taught. There's another book that I'm surprised, and if I get to talk to Tim McIntosh Smith, I'm going to ask him why. There was a book that came out in the 50s, 52, I think, during the Korean War, by a British woman that was titled Britain's Moment in the Middle East. And it's a very specific book because it deals with a little-known part of history, that there were terrible riots in Iraq when the British tried to reestablish their mandate per the Versailles Treaty. And, you know, that was under the old adage, spheres of influence. Oil had not become the critical element yet. But Elizabeth Monroe's book, Britain's Moment in the Middle East, details this. And the lead up to it, the pre-World War II treatment of the indigenous people by the Brits, the sort of superior client-subject attitude towards the Iraqis. And in 1920-21, there were terrible riots. And a lot of people got killed. They had to use the RAF. I had to bomb some of these tribes into submission. And I had read the book before the United States jumped off in March of 1993, you know, to topple Saddam Hussein and to, quote, bring democracy to the Middle East. And I said, I don't think anybody on the policymaking team ever read this book because we're going in making the same mistakes that the Brits did. And I would say, I wish I'd read this book, Tim McIntosh Smith's book, before I taught my course. And if I'm asked to teach, which I'm assured I will be, this will become a critical part because it is the first book in English that I've read. It doesn't try to psychoanalyze or second guess. It talks about a group of people that is very, very unique. And I think by virtue of the fact that Tim McIntosh Smith has lived, I mean, not traveled, didn't stay at the Hilton, lived at Sana'a in Yemen for 30 years. And, by the way, continues living there. And speaks, writes, reads both classical and street Arabic. Classical Arabic is not really spoken anymore. But this depth of knowledge to a subject that, in my opinion, the United States knows nothing about. And it's a shame because you talk about being in CI, you look at CI and you say, well, we know this about the Bosnians, we know this about the Muslims, we know this about the Serbs. There's a clink in the armor here, and let's exploit it. I don't think we have people that are knowledgeable enough in policymaking and operational positions to say, to have enough knowledge to say, this is the clink in the armor. And we go in with euphemistic, we're going to democratize the Middle East. Well, good luck.
I mean, just the title alone, you know, and I feel like I'm fairly well versed. I've talked to thousands of Arabs. I didn't realize they had a 3,000-year history. I immediately reject that because I'm told that it's only, you know, 800 years old or whatever it is.
Well,
here they are.
This is Elizabeth Monroe brings this out, does not emphasize it in her book, Britain's Moment in the Middle East, the fact that the Arab history is rich before Muhammad.
Okay.
You look at Yemen. I mean, this was a major outpost of the Roman Empire. He points out several times, and they're still shooting outside my window. I mean, he says this in the book.
Actually, as he's writing it today, they're fighting right now.
And yet, Yemen was considered in Latin, the blessed land. I mean, this is before Muhammad, before Christianity, in the sense of the coming of Jesus. And why don't we know that?
Yeah.
And, one of the dams that was built BC was considered one of the eighth wonders of the world. It was so large. And unfortunately, between intercommunal strife and not maintaining it, he's got some pictures in it. The thing was humongous. And you say, how did these people were able,
Yeah.
where the majority of people you run into in the United States, they're camel drivers, ragheads, or, one of those.
Yeah.
And yet, they have an extremely rich history. And the fact that written Arabic really did not evolve until the Quran.
Huh. Yeah, that's remarkable. Yeah, I don't have a power or any kind of command on my knowledge of Yemen, other than just a few factoids that likely aren't true.
Well, again, a British colleague, a different one that was in Bosnia, but a British colleague had spent 5 years down there, and this was after the turnover.
Yeah.
And he was an Arabic speaker. He said it's one of the most beautiful countries he's ever seen.
Huh.
He said, yes, there's desolate parts of it. There's poverty. There's but he said, there's other parts of it. He said, I can see why the Romans fell in love with it.
Yeah.
He said, it's gorgeous.
What else did you pull out of this book? For the listeners, this thing is 2.5 inches thick.
First of all, it gave me a familiarity. I can't say I'm an expert.
Sure.
It gave me a familiarity of pre-Islam Arab world. And the miracle, really, of what Muhammad was able to pull off.
Huh.
And he convinced tribes that for hundreds of years had been at each other's throats.
Yeah.
He makes a clear distinction between those that are nomadic,
Yeah.
the Bedouin, and those that became sedentary. And there's a rift there. And he argues that rift exists today.
Yeah.
Yes, there's been modernization. Most people are settled, but there's still Bedouins.
Sure.
They're nomadic in Saudi Arabia, Syria. There was in Palestine when I was there.
Yeah.
Not much room, and you got the Israelis with a stick over your head all the time. But they're there. My translator, when I was working with the Palestinians, was a Bedouin. I mean, it wasn't, my grandfather used to herd camels in the desert. It was, my father still does sheep in the desert.
Yeah.
And, he moves every 3 months.
Yeah.
This is something we fantasize about, the Old West or something.
Yeah.
Or the American Indians.
Yeah. Right.
But this is happening today. And that rift between, the settled and the nomadic, the different interpretations of Islam, under the Abbasids and under the Umayyads.
Yeah.
And the flourishing of the art under the Abbasids, of written, beautiful Arabic. And I've always maintained, based on my time in Spain, all you have to do is go down to Cordoba, parts of Sevilla, where the Spanish government has been very good at maintaining the Muslim presence.
Yeah.
These were amazingly talented people. But he is also, I think, fairly clear that Islam has been a unifying factor that has not been able to unify a people that does not want to be unified.
Yeah. When I think about Islam and its role in the world, you compare and contrast with Judaism and Christianity. And, in the Christian faith, you had this Reformation. You had a schism, and then, we had to work on things. And so the Catholic Church kind of went their way, but it sort of resolved. It, in a lot of ways, it healed itself. It took a long time, a lot of blood.
A lot of blood.
And it seems like we just haven't had that moment. And I think Judaism had all that stuff, so long ago that, there's sects, but they're a lot more mature, I guess, in their faith, I suppose. I don't want to.
A little bit more harmonious in their relationships. Sure. And the other thing is, I'm not going to go into this because he does a good job of it, but very detailed, is the split itself within Islam, Shia and Sunni, and how that has been a major bone of contention, and yet how different empires have been able to manipulate that in their own self-interest for preservation.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about that because one of the things I learned in Iraq from dealing with the Iraqis, like, hey, we were a very Western nation before all this happened. Girls wore miniskirts. They always said that. Girls wore miniskirts. We went to discos. We did all these things. We're not a religious people. Yes, we're Islamic, but, we drank, we smoked, and we did all these things. So when you guys look at us and think this is some kind of sectarian thing, it's political. The Sunnis had power. So I had to reframe my thinking into black and white, black folks and white folks, because if you are the power structure, the quote unquote white folks, the Sunnis, and then, you have the education, you have the opportunity, you should be the governor, you should be the mayor because you went to the London School of Economics and all these things. Meanwhile, the Shia are like, well, if that's how it's going to be, screw you. We're not going to participate. We're going to go do our own thing. We don't have a chance anyhow. And then you get this social, cleavage where you're like, these guys are separate and absolutely antagonistic towards each other. It just so happens that it's on this religious line. It's not on, some kind of divide religiously, at least not for all of the Iraqis. Nearly every Iraqi I talked to said this. This is more about a class, a political structure, as opposed to a religious one.
And I think to support that, a person that has interested me for a number of years is Tamerlane.
Okay.
Now, without being derogatory or disrespectful, Tamerlane fought for Islam, but I would say that he was a nominal Muslim because he was able to use the Quran to further his own empire ambitions. And here's a man that departed southern Uzbekistan in December when he was 72 years old to go conquer India. Now, if you've ever spent any time in the Central Soviet republics or former Central Soviet republics, winter's not a real happy time.
No.
And if you're going to go by horseback over the Himalayas to capture India, he died. They think of pneumonia. But 72 years old, I mean, what kind of people are these? Yeah. And he's put on his horse.
Can't you get a hobby?
And I mean, collect stamps, matchbook covers.
Yeah. He's not the only guy trying to take over India, too. I mean, India is a hard place to...
And the very interesting, I never knew this, how Islam went into southern India, peacefully, by the way. And the other thing that, again, I think there's a lack of vision on the part of so many Americans. If you take a look at the Muslims of, say, Indonesia, yes, there's violence.
Sure.
But it's not the same as the Muslims of the Middle East.
Okay.
And that schism of the Bedouin and the sedentary doesn't exist in Indonesia in the sense that it does on the Saudi Arabia Peninsula.
Interesting.
And why aren't people that are in positions to be dealing with these people looking at these types of things and crafting? Why don't we have people that speak Arabic? I mean, we've gone around that buoy a couple of times.
Sure.
But
what about like these seminal figures in Islamic and Arabic history, like Al-Ghazali, who creates this, I don't want to put it all on him, but you have to understand his impact on the Arab culture to understand the God-fearing, fatalistic attitude a lot of folks have.
Very, very true. And the other thing that I was vaguely familiar with was that even today, the importance of poetry.
Yeah.
And who the gentleman you just mentioned
Al-Ghazali
was a great poet.
Yes.
And I mean, it's not cutting line sarcastic poetry, but it's written in such a way that it's very cutting.
Yeah.
And it's commentary on the political why I bring what others don't have.
There's a lot of disregard for the poetry part. I've experienced it. I'm guilty of it. Where they'll say, "Oh, our poetry is the best poetry." Yeah, that's nice. I have no appreciation for poetry in general, but it never occurred to me to have a command over what that meant for them. And I'm some kind of cultural expert. Poof, right by me. Never even considered to be something that I could at least see, if not leverage to my advantage.
Blindsided.
Yeah. And I heard them say it over and over again.
Oh.
And I just absolutely stonewalled that over and over again. And it is embarrassing to get that wrong over and over again. And I know it's important. I know now, especially. I finally got it through my head.
Well, the translator I referred to, the Bedouin translator, COL was his name, and he had just married when we worked, and we worked for a year together. It was bunky situations. We'd sleep on the ground in Gaza. At that time, I could go into Gaza. I could go into the West Bank.
Yeah.
I could go any place I wanted in the West Bank. I always go with COL. And he had just married an absolutely gorgeous girl. Lived down in, and I think he's still there, down in Rafah, right on the Egyptian border, where all the tunnels are. I was fortunate enough to be invited to their house 3 times.
Oh, yeah.
And he would sit there and read poetry. And I'm very ashamed to say I don't know Arabic.
Yeah.
But the sensuousness of the rhythm of the way he read it.
Yeah.
There was 3 of us in the room. It wasn't like, karaoke someplace.
Yeah.
But and I'm saying, God, I wish I could read that. And his wife and he would laugh at something, and then he would say, well, what he's saying is this. And, you say, how clever.
Yeah.
How clever. And where do you find that in the Western world?
Yeah.
I think there's some areas in our Western civil that poetry might be appreciated a little bit more than others.
Yeah.
I've always, since I was, even before I went to the academy, I was drawn to poetry. Number one, my grandfather, who was Scott, loved Robert Burns.
Right.
And so he would read Robert Burns to me. And before I finished high school, I've still got the book. It's a very old book of Robert Burns. And that interests me. And then I became fixated, really, on World War I poetry.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Particularly when I came back. I think I mentioned when I was in Vietnam, one of my favorite, and I think he is probably considered one of the best World War I poets, was Wilfred Owen.
Okay.
Wilfred Owen was a lieutenant. His poem, Dulce et decorum pro patria mori,
Okay.
which was one of the pledges of the legions.
Yeah.
Sweet and proper it is that I die for my country.
Okay.
He uses it. He ends a poem describing a guy dying after a gas attack.
Oof.
And there's this space,
Yeah.
Dulce et decorum pro patria mori. I used to use that in my classes at the War College.
This is just an aside, but it's funny. I have no real strength in Latin at all, but if you're in the military, there's enough Latin thrown around that that pro patria is for country.
Right, right.
And Dolce, we all know Dolce because there's so many things that are named sweet something. But yeah, the wisdom that comes from trenches. I'm a really big fan. Yeah, really fascinated and intrigued by all of the World War I art. Where these guys are, because just for my friends that are listening, if you ever get a chance to go to Kansas City to the World War I Museum, it is an incredible. Have you been? It's giving me chills just thinking about it. The first thing you do when you walk into the exhibit is you're elevated over a clear floor, and you're walking over the poppies that represent all the dead people. And you're instantly, gosh, it's hard to even talk about it. You're instantly brought into this thing, and you see like these artisans that are in the trenches, and they're hand crafting the shells, the spent casings. into a Virgin Mary or incredible things.
And to get back to his book, I think he does a credible job of the British use, but with their complete compliance and desire in the Arab revolt, Lawrence of Arabia, but strange though the gentleman may have been, he did speak Arabic.
Yeah,
he understood the people, and he was revered. But even after Versailles, he said, "It's hopeless. We can never ever be able to work properly with them because we never do what we say we're going to do."
Well, we keep doing that, right?
Well, I mean, is it not germane? That's in 1930 before he killed himself on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And that's the other point that I think throughout the book, including up to, he sort of ends with Yemen today, is this continual strife that that is both tribal based, encouraged while it's discouraged by the Quran. The split between the Sunni and the Shia, the Bedouin sedentary split. It's one of these things that has been present in Arab history going back way before Muhammad.
Yeah.
And it's what split Muhammad up 30 years after he died, or split Islam. And, he doesn't give this big spotlights, roll the drums on the Sunni Shia split.
Yeah.
What he does is he highlights the two battles that actually sort of solidified that. And it was a power struggle. It wasn't a religious struggle.
So that goes back, that whole idea between class and politics. It's not necessarily religion.
Right,
It goes all the way back.
And of course, the Arabs use the inheritance thing. Was he or she, Fatima, was he really chosen?
Right.
Or is it just because Muhammad said that should be it?
Yeah, it never occurred to me, but you're right. The thing goes all the way back. So again, for my friends who are listening, all of the people who ran, the subsequent Muhammad progeny, I guess you would call them, they're not all related, but most of them had their heads cut off. Sometimes in battle, sometimes not.
He points that out.
Yeah.
He said the number of leaders, religious or otherwise, that ended violently.
Yeah.
Or their lives ended violently.
Right.
Decapitation.
Yeah.
Dragging by a camel. All right, they have some very ingenious ways.
Yeah.
Would it have lessened the shock of watching somebody be decapitated on television? Today, Americans, no, it hits home. Not if you realize the history of these people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And violence. And he doesn't dwell on this, but this sort of reestablishment of a caliphate. He said that's another move in the broader history of the Muslim people.
Expand on that so I can understand better. I know that there's this desire for the caliphate to be reestablished.
That is based on an interpretation of the Quran.
Okay.
And that fits into his larger scheme, that these justifications, be they divine or otherwise,
right,
have risen consistently throughout Arab history. And there was a review in the literary supplement by obviously a Brit, I think probably of Muslim lineage, that spoke, rightfully so, very favorably of it.
Yeah.
But I thought he really went off track, and he said it's sort of like the English people before the Norman conquest. They were just a bunch of tribes running around killing each other, and they came together and became an imperial power. Well, I said, TLS, I'm not going to publish. It hadn't published yet. I said, all you got to do is read Churchill's 4-volume thing, History of the English-Speaking People. Yes, there was that going on, but there was a consolidation, and there was the idea of ceding some sort of governance to democratic rule. That doesn't exist. That doesn't.
Why? Why not? What ultimately
because
is
of
it about? The tribal nature of it.
The tribal nature. I mean, I'm still thinking about that.
Yeah.
You caught me half off guard. What happened in the United States in 1770, 1775?
Yeah.
Why did that happen? How did that work? I think a more pertinent question, is it working today?
Yeah.
Will it work in the future?
Yeah, there is that. Yeah.
And he makes one of the reviews I saw, I think it was in The Economist, which was a fairly good review, but it says, Mr. McIntosh Smith is obviously anti-American. Bunking hot air. I think what he's done, he's rightfully pointed out our blithe ignorance of what we go trundling into to solve.
Are you familiar with Michael Oren's Power, Faith, and Fantasy?
I have not read it. I am familiar with it.
It's a similar message. It's the history of us with the Middle East, and then just our, whether it's missionaries or Marines, marching across, and again, not to disparage it, because everybody in their own time is doing their best with what they got, but we just refuse to get this right. Refuse to learn, refuse to en masse get better at it. Maybe you're good at it. Maybe he's good at it. Maybe they are good at it, but as an institution, as a country, as a service branch, ain't happening.
No. And there's a certain hubris that I think is set in this country since World War II. And we did well. We've done even better promoting how well we did in World War II. And what was our total number of casualties? 600,000.
Yeah.
Russians, 7 to 11 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Different approach, different outcomes.
And I understand perpetuating the myth of the country, and so much of it is myth. But it is taken for truth. And that is one of the reasons I'm concerned, and that's the reason, what happened on our Declaration of Independence, what happened with our Constitution, phenomenal, a miracle, really.
Yeah.
And that we've been able to survive over 200 years with that. But he makes a very telling remark. He said, the British Empire was extolled for not only its vastness, but all the advances that it brought to everybody. It lasted 200 years.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And he's talking about the Middle East. He's talking about Aden. Yeah. He's talking about Yemen. He's talking about Iraq.
Is it that things like the American Revolution, where a country with no budget for a military takes on the biggest, most powerful, best military in the world and wins, that's just dumb luck? That World War II and ultimately World War I, that whole package of fighting goes our way. But if we were to roll the dice again and try that again, it goes the other way. The Brits are like, let's negotiate.
I may get some stones thrown here. My take on the British attempt to quell the revolution of 1775 was not unlike, there's great dissimilarities, but it's not unlike us in Vietnam in the sense that the British came over here with a sense of absolute superiority. Now, they hadn't defeated Napoleon yet.
Mm-hmm.
They had, by the time of the War of 1812, of course, Battle of New Orleans was fought after Waterloo, but they were dealing with people that had a very strong desire to not remain. And really, they weren't in the majority, but they knew the countryside.
Yeah.
They knew the other people. And the British weren't quite prepared for that.
Yeah.
The American Revolution, there's a brand new book out on that, which I don't have, but I have to read. I have not read. I'm certainly not an expert. I have not read in depth about the American Revolution for some years, but it's an interesting phenomenon. But I think what is equally interesting is that we came out of that and adopted a very similar form of government as the people we fought against.
Yeah.
That has not happened in Arab history.
Yeah.
And you take a look at what the Mongol invasion, the destruction of Baghdad. Again, you could argue they were nominally Muslim, but they were absolutely, unequivocally about killing everybody.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Again, you could argue they were nominally Muslim, but they were absolutely, unequivocally about killing everybody. The women, no, but everybody else, yeah.
Yeah.
And how many people know that history of the Middle East? The attitude that the male's got to die.
Yeah.
And the women are for our use only.
Yeah. I want to back up and go back to this dumb luck thing, because let's just say, for example, the bad in New Orleans happens a couple of technologically advanced years earlier. I'm just saying, like, if it had happened, like, say, like, just, the progress of the battle happens before that, the rifle was as good as it was, because at that time, like, 5 years makes a big difference.
Right.
So we dig in. The Brits have never faced an embattlement that's got palm trees in it. I don't know if you know this about, because I read this in the book and it fascinated me. The more the Brits shot lead into the palm tree, the more it caught it, because it's not really wood. It
absorbs it.
Yeah. And so it became leaden, basically. And so it was like that, what normally might work, just, bashing it in didn't work. And so then they, frontal assaulted, and the Brits are like, never again. We're never doing that. That's a bad plan. But that's a technological advance and a little bit of luck on the fact that those trees were the right kind of trees. I don't know if Andy Jackson knew that.
Have you been to the battlefield down there?
No.
It's not trench line. The rebel trench line is semi-kept. But there were a couple of major tactical errors that the British made. They lost 2 generals in that battle, by the way.
Yeah.
Plus, people don't realize how long had they been fighting Napoleon. I mean, yeah, they were veteran troops.
Right.
But a country gets tired.
Yeah. Is it political will then, or
is it? And they had to march through swamps. Jackson. I'm not a big fan of Andrew Jackson. Jackson did a masterful defense. He really did, and wasn't completely convinced that he was going to prevail. But on the other hand, again, what we've talked about in the past, who made up the bulk of the force? It was not uniformed Americans.
Right.
It was pirates.
Yeah.
It was blacks.
Yeah. New Orleans. It was New Orleans.
Creoles.
Everybody. Yeah. Okay. So I want to get back. You kind of closed that point before about on the women thing. And women are such an interesting thing in the Arab Islamic world, and how they're treated. Like the fact that you get to meet your interpreter's wife is exceptional for someone to meet someone's Arab wife. And usually they're sequestered off and they're not allowed, that kind of thing. Women just recently getting allowed to drive cars in Saudi Arabia. These are things that when we talk about equality, it just shakes your head like, yeah, we want women to be treated equally and paid equal. Oh, okay, great. But look at this part of the world is so dramatic, hundreds of years different.
You're absolutely right. I remember in Gaza and Khalil always would come. I did establish a relationship with the head of the police, Palestinian police. He was a colonel. Khalil and I were at least 3 times, I'd like to think 5 times, invited to his house.
Right.
Number one, I've never eaten better food.
Sure.
Number two, it was always curious. Corruption is rampant. He had a very nice house and was on the sea. But we'd go in there and, he'd take off his headscarf. But you could hear women, but you never saw them.
Yeah.
And the speaking was very subdued. Then the plates started to appear. But first, everybody got comfortable. They'd hook up the hookah.
Yeah.
And then the Johnny Walker would come out.
Of course. Yes. Yes.
And I always, I wrapped it in something else. I always took down a bottle of Black Label for him. And then we'd sit for hours at the table. And you could hear the women in the kitchen, but not a one was present.
Right.
But with Khalil, it was different. We ate together. Margot, a good friend of ours who we really owe a telephone call, is a fellow by the name of Yasser Barakat, who is an antiquarian dealer in Jerusalem. And well known. All the lithographs I bought from Yasser in Jerusalem. I became very close with Yasser. And, you have to understand the Arab, and Yasser was Bedouin, sedentary but Bedouin, but there were hours that I would spend in his shop. First of all, you went in and there was the obligatory 30 minutes. How are the kids?
Yeah.
How's the wife? How's the grandmother? How's the dog? They didn't have dogs, but you get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there was tea or Turkish coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And you sit there and you talk.
Yeah.
He spoke excellent English, but son's educated at Oxford. We've met two of them. We met the daughter too, but I was invited to their house.
Yeah.
And at that time, Wafa, that was his wife, or is his wife, Wafa did not wear a headscarf. When I went back the second time with Margot, and again, Margot is very, very good with them, and she would spend hours. You didn't say, hey, I came in looking for an Arab sword.
Yes.
Which most Americans would do.
Right.
He wanted to talk.
Yeah.
And you didn't talk about anything that was around you. You talked about what's the Palestinian Authority going to do? What's Gaza look like? What about Syria? He was a great admirer of the King of Jordan. I had a picture of him in his uniform. But that was true. And we felt particularly, by Arab Muslim standards, they were fairly modern. Now, the boys had been educated. Margot can tell you, I think one of them had gone to Georgetown here, but both of them had gone to Oxford in England. Good-looking boys, smart, but they're also smart because they're operating out of Oman right now. And both of them are very good at IT stuff.
Yeah.
And the daughter,
Yeah.
I mean, just gorgeous.
Right.
And when she went out, she'd be covered.
Right.
The only person who was covered when we were in the house was Wafa. She had decided to go back to the traditional way.
Sure.
Now, she didn't cover her face.
Right.
But she cooked and served and everything on the headscarf.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a social dialogue that says the hijab is somehow empowering to women. It is absolutely contrary to everything I know about, and I don't claim to speak for the entire Middle East, nor can I even define what the Middle East is and isn't. But I don't understand that, based on my experience with the families that I've met and the way women are treated. I can't understand how being required to have a squire, being required to cover up, because if you're not, you're a whore. Yeah. I don't understand how that's empowering. Is there something in that book that's written by Tim McIntosh Smith that would help me understand that? Or is that just something that's
indirectly? The women fighted what the Western press, and I say it's the Western press, highlight, and we automatically, cover our eyes, look between our fingers, that horrible type thing. Yeah. My experience in Palestine, and the Palestinians are unique.
For sure.
They're different. Abad was a police commander in Gaza. I saw I think he only had one wife. Somebody said he had two. But the one, which was about his age, she was a force to be reckoned with. Wafa, and you asked Margot this, Wafa was very demure. She was attractive, not beautiful, but attractive. Always very gracious. She ran that house.
Yeah.
And she told Yasser what to do. And she kept the books.
Yeah. Okay. So she really ran the house.
So did you ever see her at the store? Did she ever tell him what to sell, not to sell? No.
No. Right.
But she ran the house.
That book that you're sitting next to there, Benedicta Grima's Secrets from the Field, is one of those books too, where you start to understand the real divide, at least in Pashtunistan between the men and the women, and how even in their own culture, they're separated groups. And there was performance that as Benedicte became more and more enculturated, she was required to do things. She had to have a squire later on. She wasn't a free Western woman. She had to be covered up, and they would allow her some access. She could go to the male mosque or the male time for worship, but only just barely, because she started to know better. And so as she got more and more into it, and it's a fantastic, like when you read that and you understand how little we understand about the day-to-day workings of these people, it's just.
And that's critical. That's absolutely critical. In Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it, I went with Khalil several times to Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain services that women could attend separate. What I found very curious about that is there was an Orthodox family that Jewish Orthodox family, I'd say, well, he was a former LA cop, but he'd really gone off the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived in a conservative Orthodox community just south of Jerusalem. And I stayed with him 2 weekends. That was a chore, Pete. That was a chore.
I bet.
American Jews, obviously, both of them, but absolutely do not deviate from what you'd go in there, she would light all the candles before sunset on Friday.
Yeah.
Because you can't do work.
Right.
All the food had been cooked. You didn't do dishes. When she had her menstrual, he had opened a bookstore. The bookstore at first was very interesting in Jerusalem, but then he went into the ultra-religious stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when Margot met him. He looked like a fucking Old Testament prophet.
Yeah.
The big beard. The Palestinians were burning. They were subhuman. They had to be killed.
Wow.
He scared Margot. He was a big man. I mean, he's a former cop. But what I found extremely interesting was they adhered to the old ritual that once her menstrual cycle started, she was isolated.
Yeah.
She left the marital bedroom. When it finished, well, first of all, she could not be seen by men during that period.
Right.
Only women could attend to it. When the cycle finished, she had to have the ritual bath, and a man could not be there.
Right. Wow.
And until she had the ritual bath, and it was determined by whoever that the cycle had terminated, then she was allowed back in the marital bed.
Yeah.
And I said, I went to a Quaker school when my parents were in South America.
Of course you did.
I figured I chalked up a few marks there. The 2 weekends with McKay, he changed the name from Michael, it became McKay from the Old Testament. The 2 weekends there, on Shabbat, I went to temple 5 times.
That's a lot of temple.
No, 5 times during Saturday.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Shabbat.
Yeah.
But my point is, the women went. They were always isolated.
Yeah.
And they would have these, they weren't in separate rooms, but they'd have these curtains where you couldn't see them.
Right.
They could see you.
Huh.
But you couldn't see them, but because it's wrong to lust.
Yes.
During Shabbat.
This is the part that I do struggle with Islam in particular. I mean, I know that there are Orthodox Jews and there are certainly very conservative Christians and whatever. I'll stop naming religions now. But that whole idea that just the mere vision or the, having a woman walking around with her wrist exposed, like modest is one thing, but modesty at the end of a stick because you're a whore.
Well, that's what it is. That's
right?
what it is. And, I can't remember the name of it. There's a name in English. When I was at the Quaker school, since I'd never been baptized, they chose what church I attended on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And Sundays was a 3-hitter. Mm-hmm. You had chapel in the morning, you had breakfast, you went down to church, and they were very prescient. They chose the Dutch Reform for me. And the Dutch Reform is hardcore. And then you had Vespers in the evening. And the Dutch Reform, now I was looking for the guy with the long stick.
Yeah.
That'd walk down and hit you in the head if you fell asleep, But I mean, yes, that type of it's holdover from really the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And we, Margot and I, have family that he certainly fits the bill as a sanctimonious hypocrite.
Right.
But if a member of the family, a female member, an adult female member, is going to be in the house and his wife's not there, he will go sleep someplace else. But of course, he'll lie. He beats his wife. The kids are absolute disasters. You know, I said, where the hell's this covenant with God? Is it selective? Or?
Yeah.
And I'm not getting on religion, but
right.
People manipulate religion just like they manipulate it so much else.
Yeah, yeah. It's like at some point, the ceremony, and not to belittle religious practices, you just run out of things you can do well. And if you're going to light candles on Friday, you're giving something else up. You know, maybe it's hugging your kid or who knows, right? But there's just only so much adherence to stuff you can do before you just, it's like what I talk about like in conflict zones. You reach an ethical saturation where your best intention no longer matters because you're trying to do everything right. Yeah. And so it just flips.
It's not going to happen.
Right. Right. And so you end up trying to help women in a conflict zone or, you know, whatever. And you end up doing the opposite of it because you just can't do it well.
If we're close to wrapping up,
we are.
I have to tell you this saying. This is also from Margot Edward Relat, Coldstream Guards officer. Spoke perfect Arabic. Superb officer. And he was walking home. He was on the team I was working on. And we had Brits, we had Canadians, good group of guys. And he was walking home. It was winter. And it was dark. And he walked through an Orthodox part of town.
Yeah.
Which, you know, both Margot and I had done it. You get funny looks. I mean, you know, the round bear hats.
Yeah.
The ringlets and all this. But he said it was just after dark. And he said this older Jewish man came up to him, took his hand. He said, I'm very comfortable in Arabic. I'm not in Yiddish or Jewish.
Right.
You know, he said, okay. He took him into an apartment building, went down the stairs, and Ed's been shot at a couple of times. And he said, yeah, I wasn't real worried, but I was worried.
Yes.
He said, I got down there. He said, first of all, the smell was horrible because they don't bathe very often.
Right.
And he said, this guy's he's holding my hand. And he puts me, and he found the light switch, and he had me turn on the switch. They couldn't turn on the switch. They couldn't turn on.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
And then it was, you know, very subdued. All right. And then escorted him out.
I'm going to tell you a partnering story. Since we're trying to talk about Arabs, the book by Tim McIntosh Smith, hopefully we'll have him on the show very soon. It's really hard for him to break free from Yemen and everything, but I think he's going to be in London, so we're hopeful. But some of the easiest partnering I ever did was during the Gulf Cup, and you know it's the soccer championships for the Arab states, and I'll just say it directly because I don't know a way to say it nicely. We handle this stuff terribly. And when we teach partnering, oh, by the way, we don't teach partnering, but, you know, we're not taught these things. Like, hey, by the way, Arabs, among a lot of other people, are bonkers about soccer. You got a bunch of military dudes and there's soccer on TV and it's the championship. Guess what they want to do? They just want to watch soccer.
Yeah. And
so I went there and I realized, and I had to learn. I had made the mistakes before that. And I watched my peers try to get things done. And I'm like, hey, I know it's a Arab Cup right now. So I would love to learn about what you got. I would invite you to my Super Bowl party. Can I come? And they're like, yeah, of course, Pete, you can come. And I'm like, I need a team to root for. I don't care if they win or not. I just want to be part of the process. They gave me a team. They told me, you know, these are the guys. This is your guy. You know, that's these. And they told me all this stuff. They fed me. We drank alcohol, all of it.
Hard.
Yeah. I just shut up and I just enjoyed the hell out of watching soccer with these dudes. And I was instantly several pegs above anybody else in that whole American enclave. Of
course you were.
Because I didn't try to accomplish one damn thing. I just sat there and enjoyed soccer with these guys and just observed and shut up and because I enjoy soccer during World Cup time, but I'm not crazy. These guys are crazy. It's like going, if we were to go to England during the last World Cup and we wanted to do business when England was playing, you would never do that.
Not good.
People were smashing their faces through windows in bars. They were so fired up. Like, that's a time just to let them do that. So that was a thing I learned, is that, and it's part of my overall lesson, is that we all hate cancer. We all want our kids to get better. Most of us love soccer.
You remember, I grew up in South America.
Yeah.
I played soccer.
Yeah.
I played soccer with Peruvians, and it's the only sport that I will give a nodding acknowledgement of. As I said in our first interview, to me, at least in this country, it's spectator sports is the opiate of the masses, but paraphrase Marx.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what I felt that I was able to establish with the Palestinians. First of all, I wasn't running around with a gaggle of other Americans.
Yeah, that helps.
Khalil and I hit it off.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of those. I tried so hard to get him a scholarship at Georgetown, but his English just wasn't that good.
Yeah.
We actually brought him over here. But what wonderful people.
Yeah.
And as I told somebody in the embassy, and really pissed them off. They said, "Well, they got these guys that blow up buses and everything." I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I don't have to come to Jerusalem to meet an asshole.
Yeah.
I can stay in the United States. We got plenty of them there."
Tons of them. Yeah. And just like anywhere else, you have people that are assholes. You have people that are trying hard. And if you kind of allow like a military guy to be a military guy who's a military guy anywhere, you've got a good beginning for a premise.
You do.
Instead of just saying this guy's dumb, like, hey, what can I learn from this guy? And you start from that point, and it works better. And I'm dying to have Tim on the show and talk to him about his book, because that is a big, thick book. I'm fascinated by things like that. And there's just
read it. I mean, I've done no justice at all. It's as you say, a thick book, but he's a wonderful wordsmith.
Yeah.
You will not be bored.
Yeah. Oh, I'm positive.
Keep a dictionary at the side too.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the Kindle. You read it on the Kindle, you just put your finger on the word, and it's like, I know, but I like that. Then I actually look the word up, and I highlight things I don't know. So
I use both editions. I very reluctantly I use dictionary.com on the computer.
Yeah,
which isn't bad.
Yeah.
But if you want the real nuances, you got to read it.
Fair enough. Yeah. I also like I'm going to keep on talking, but I also love the etymology of words.
So do I.
And so if you can understand that, you understand,
learn a lot.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks. We have to do it again, especially when Tim comes on, because it's always fascinating.
Well, I enjoy it, and I very much look forward. I have not hesitated. I've made it a point of not emailing Tim. I've got his email address, but tell him that I'm really, really looking forward to it. And if you'd be kind enough to say, I do have that review for the American Conservative, and tell him, don't be put off by the title.
Yeah.
One of their editorial policies, and if you saw my piece on the Gold Star Mothers, a word that I didn't originate it, but I did use it, and it's my word, is wars of choice.
Yeah.
That we trundle off into the United States. One of their editorial policies is, and they said, well, we really like that. We're going to put that in our wording. But one of their editorial policies is, are we justified in fighting the wars we recently fought?
Yeah.
And I told her, in fact, I wrote the essay editor and said, I talked to her on the phone. I don't know her. And I said, you can make the argument that this is argument against wars of choice, but the subject's much bigger.
So big. And 3,000 years.
3,000. And that would not be fair.
Yeah.
It can be mentioned. And she said, no, I think don't do an essay, do a review.
Yeah.
So they gave me 2,000 words. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
And they're going to run it, at least according to the book editor, he said, we're looking at running it by itself on the blog.
And then tell us the blog name so we can look it up.
I'll have to get it's on my computer.
Okay. We'll put
as soon as it's published, they send me the link. And and I'll send you.
I'll put it in the show notes for everybody listening if you want to read his review of Arabs. And yeah, trust me, we're going to get into this with Tim, and it's going to be mind blowing because anybody who puts that much work, just looking at the size of that book, that's a slow reader, and you got to go through again because there's so much. There's got to be so much.
I could go through it 5 times. I take
the note section is probably a book by itself.
I mean, he's got people like Sinclair Lewis.
Oh.
He cites Sinclair Lewis.
Yeah.
He cites, needless to say, Kipling.
Yeah.
He cites Mark Twain.
Wow, he got everybody in there.
Are you familiar with Patrick Lee Fermer?
No.
Patrick Lee Fermer is a fabulously interesting guy. And I had to call Margot. I said, he's quote Patrick Lee Fermer. Patrick Lee Fermer is one of these guys that only the Brits can produce.
Mm-hmm.
He actually captured a 3-star German general.
Did he really?
Crete.
Wow.
He was special operations. The retribution was tremendous among the civilian population.
Yeah.
But he did capture him, and he remained a POW until the end of the war. But before the wars, he had walked from Calais all the way to Budapest.
Really?
He wrote 2 books about it.
Wow.
Now, there's probably some puffing in there.
Sure.
The books are absolutely great.
Say his name one more time so we can find it.
Patrick Lee Fermer, -F-E-M, F-E-R-M-O-R.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.